Okay, so today's shop update is going to be on stops. They are massively important in the workshop for repeating work and accurate work. I've got a couple which I've adapted the Festool I'm going to show you. I've got a couple of Kreg ones and some really exciting new ones on the drill press, the RUWI ones. So I'm going to show you those, how it all works. So what's great about this Kreg system of stops, I tend to only use this flip stop. It does also come with the main one, which slots over the rail and is probably a more solid stop than the flip stop. But I actually apply very little pressure this way. So why I really like this flip stop is, say this bit here which we're going to cut to 50. Well, first of all I need to trim off the waste on the end. And now I've got a clean end, I can now flip this down and then carry on working. Just applying a tiny bit of pressure. So very much working like the flip stop on the panel saw. I think it's pretty crucial to have the flip stop. So that's really good. Another thing on this Kreg system, what I did was I've actually mounted this rail. So I've got some Axminster strip and I've just got a clamp and got a little locator pin here and the same on that bit of strip so that it can't move left or right. It drops in and then the measuring strip is always accurate. And then what I've tended to do, because some of the lumber you get these days, especially this CLS in England, it's not quite straight. So rather than having any kind of bad cuts at the fence, it's flush here, flush there, but if you look down there, you can see it's not even touching. And in fact, this wood's not straight. You can see it's bowed in and it's closer here than here. But that's still fine for using your stops, because there's no need for this to be touching this fence. The key is that it is parallel on your mitre fence. So one tip I would give you is not trying to set up your mitre saw with an absolutely accurate straight edge, because if your lumber's not straight, it ends up pushing away from the blade. I'm making sure that this area is level and I'm not really worried about that. I've got all of the room of the width of this that the lumber could be out, even if it's right out here, doesn't matter, still going to give me an accurate measurement. So that's one thing, is to keep your rail, if you're working with twisted lumber, away from your mitre fence and not try and get the whole thing parallel and spend ages on that. That was something I tried to do and then I found I was getting problems at the blade here, cutting a perfect 90. So I've had lots of DIY router tables and never really wanted to spend too much money on a great big table. I never really had the room just to have a dedicated table. So I've just bolted this on the end of my profile, quite simply. And while I was in the States, I showed you the woodpecker corner clamps. The other thing I picked up, because they were quite cheap out there, or more reasonable, was the flip stop. Kreg again, this was a Kreg table I bought on eBay, and the Kreg fence. So it's a Kreg flip stop. And I've got two of those, and in the States, I've got to be honest, they're really cheap. They're something like £15. If you pick them up out there, it might even be £14 each. So for 28 quid, I've been clamping stuff on here and doing all sorts of different bodges, but there's nothing like having, when you're routing, just a really quick, solid, and these are solid. So for me, I recommend, picking up something like this. They do have a measurement on there, it doesn't really work. Similar to the measuring tape. It's not worth that on the router because the bits are constantly changing in their width. But yeah, really good system, the flip stop, really neat on the Kreg bench. I'm sure there's other companies that have a similar thing, but I just went with the Kreg one because I got this table really cheap on eBay. One thing that's always eluded me is how to have a really good fence for my little drill press, and my system originally was this double profile, this 80-40. The problem I found with this double profile is that if you're doing real tight stuff, the chuck can actually hit, as you see here, the chuck rubs on the profile which is not a good thing at all. It's actually worn into the profile there a couple of times. So the 80 profile just doesn't really work. You don't need it. And how I tried to do this was I swapped out the little nut on the Festool stop. This is the Festool stop, which goes on the rail or on the MFT when I had it. And I just bought one of these. I'll put a link in the description. I bought one of these little T-nut type things. And it does work really well with profile. Clamps on, goes down there. It does hit on, if you're using 80, you won't get to the bottom. So the other thing you can obviously do, this is the 40 profile. Now if you're using 40 profile, it's pretty good. Again, it doesn't quite, if you look at it on the table there, it doesn't quite go. Let's get this out of the way. So the next thing is you could have tried it with the 40 profile. This is a bit of 40 profile cut, and the Festool system, if you've got these spare, they're not cheap anyway, I'd say, but if you do have a couple spare, you can just put one of those adapters in, which I'll send a link. Still, it doesn't quite touch the bottom, but it does work as a flip stop. I then came across one of my favourites. You hear me talking about them all the time, the RUWI system. Now they do this push in for profile and it clips. And I actually found on their website, let's get this out of the way, I actually found they do a rail with stops and with the clips here, which is absolutely brilliant. I love it. This has definitely been the best system. There's a little knob here which attaches so you can move this rail, whether you're using this on profile or whether you've got a system here. This is some ply. This could be screwed to the top of your drill press, and then slot fittings go in, hold the rail on, which is really, really cool. And now slide this around, lock it down there, which is good. And then you come to their stops, the RUWI stops, which for me are kind of the king of profile stops. They are seriously heavy duty. They're really tight, really strong. They're kind of like a milled aluminium with the lock, a nice big knob. So this is now my drill press setup, and I've got to be honest, it's the best I've had by miles. It's definitely the best system. They also do this kind of standoff clamp. I've got a couple of different ones. So you can also have this as a kind of, put this anywhere on your rail. And obviously the joy of using the profile on your drill press is that this profile can come in any length, sort of 3 meters even. So you can have a great big long piece for your different setups for drilling if that's what you're doing. Or as I say, use one of those systems. If I'd have known about cutting these slots originally, I'd have had this piece of MDF cut like this. But this may go on a future drill press. I am considering a bigger floor standing drill press for me and my son to share. He does the metal work, and I'll use this for the small stuff like I have been. So definitely my favourite stops is the RUWI ones. I absolutely love them. I'll put a link in the description to this system. If you've already got profile, you can just buy the parts from RUWI. I bought this as a whole set so that I had the angles and all the clamps in one go and not messing around. While we're looking at the drill press, the other little thing I didn't show you from my visit to the States, I've had loads of problems. I bought this flexible hose, which is supposed to be quite rigid for when I'm drilling. It still didn't work. So while I was there from Rockler, I picked up this flexible neck, and now finally I can position that right on my drill, and it does work. And this fits, just if anyone's wondering, this does fit as standard in the profile, 40/40 profile. Comes with a locking nut, goes in there, and it can just lock down and move. So that's really good. That'll work with your router or your drill. Really good little system. Okay, with the stops, the final stop I'm going to show you is from Banggood. Now, I ordered these, and in fact Banggood in the end sent me a load of stuff to try for free. So I didn't pay for these, just so that everyone knows, I didn't pay for these, but they are absolutely awesome. They're really well made. They're easily as well made as the Festool plastic. Very similar if you have a look. Real beefed up version. And they've got a little adjustment here, which is handy. So if you did have a measuring tape and this was sliding along, you can give it a fine adjustment and use that little point there for your measuring adjustment. The problem I've got, mega problem, is I don't have anything with this profile, so I haven't been able to use them. This doesn't fit in any of the 40/40 or 80/40. It doesn't fit in my track saw, band saw. This system, I think this is probably more like an American type T-rail or T-track they call. I might just mill some of this back and maybe try and get this inside the 40, because it'd be really useful if it fitted in here. Or I might just order a bit of T-track and see if I can do something clever on the other bench with it. But they're really well made, and if you've got T-track or can be bothered to re-engineer that, these are great, and they're not that expensive. If they fitted on here, you could see they would go right to the ground on the 40 profile. You'd have them all the way out the way, and you'd have all the way down, and they wouldn't quite work on the router table because it wouldn't go just to the bottom. But on this fence here, it would be perfect. It would be absolutely great. So just something to keep in mind, those. I'll put a link in the description. As I said, these were sent to me. I'm not advertising them, but I will put a link in the description because they've got to be useful to someone. They're really well made. Okay, that's it for this week's Sunday Shop Update. I hope you found it useful. I'll see you on the next one.